Hi, I'm Elizabeth, this is the Bookish North, and I thought it was about time I showed my face on here again. It's been 3 weeks, and I'm sure the only one that's fretted about that has been me, but no matter, I'm here to talk about books again. And let's call this a weekly reading video, though it covers more than a single week. I have 4 books that I finished towards the end of October that I want to talk about. I want to give you a quick update on how I'm doing with Nonfiction November, and I have a small book haul to tack to the end of this video. So that's my plan. Yeah, I have a table full of books in front of me, so I better get started. So the last 2 weeks of October I finished 1 physical book and then 3 audiobooks, which were all non-fiction, because apparently I was in the spirit of non-fiction November already. But let's start with the physical book I finished, and that was Black Vodka by Deborah Levy. So I read 3 of her books over the past 2 years, and she has quickly become one of my favorite writers because I've loved all 3 of those. So when my friend was cleaning out her bookshelves and asked if anybody wanted some of the books in her pile, I grabbed this quickly. So this is a collection of short stories. I think there's 10 stories in here. They all deal with relationships in some form, most of them romantic relationships between a man and a woman, but there is at least 1 story about siblings. Yeah. Sadly, I did not like this book nearly as much as I have done her other works. This was the kind of book that I enjoyed well enough while I was reading it. There were some good phrases, there were some interesting scenes, but I didn't really connect emotionally to any of the stories, and because of that it became a fairly forgettable book for me. It's been 3 weeks since I finished it, and I could hardly be pressed to tell you what any of the stories were about now, so sadly that was a bit of a miss for me. However, I had more luck with my audiobook picks. The first I finished is one that I have already mentioned on this channel. It's called Else går til psykolog, or Else is seeing a psychologist, by the Norwegian comedian Kåss Furuseth. So the premise of this book is that she has been seeing a psychologist for, I think, about 2 years. She has brought a tape recorder to the sessions, and this book is basically transcripts from those recordings. Naturally, this book is edited, some names are changed, and I'm sure lots of conversation has been omitted from the book, but still the book reads like a fairly raw and honest version of the conversations they have been having. And I felt like it was a very brave book to publish, because she really goes into some of her deepest insecurities in here, and to laying that bare for the public like this is, well, brave is the best word I can come up with for that. I think it was an interesting insight into what goes on in a room like that, and I really think that this is a book that benefited from being consumed in audio form, because it is just a conversation between 2 people, and hearing that acted out like you did in this book really added to the experience of the book. So it's a hard book to talk about, because how can you rate somebody's conversation with their psychologist? I mean, you feel like you can't, but I enjoyed the book, so I'm glad I chose that one. And then the next book on my list was something completely different. It's another Norwegian book. This one is called The Journey to Bretton Woods by Maria Berg Reinertsen. She's a journalist working with economical stories or articles in a big newspaper in Norway, and this is a book where she explores some aspects of economical history. She has been looking at some things going on in the global economy in the world today, and then she goes back in time to try to find sort of the origin of some of the key conflicts within the world of economy today. So she has gone back to 1944 and a meeting or a summit that took place at Bretton Woods in the US towards the end of the Second World War. And she doesn't really focus on that meeting in itself, but she focuses on the journey the European delegates going to that meeting was on, which was on board the ship Queen Mary, that was traveling from the UK to the US in a zigzagging pattern, trying to avoid being sunk by German submarines. And on board here were a lot of bankers and economical theorists, and they were going over to the US to have a discussion and try to create a new global world order that would prevent something like the Second World War to happen again, to make a more stable global economy, and in that way just avoid things that could lead to war. So they had a very ideological sort of purpose going into this. And she follows the people who was on that journey. We get a lot of their backstory. We also hear some things about what will happen to them after that journey. And she jumps back and forth in time quite a lot. And we also hear a lot about current economic situations going on, like the crisis of 2008 and about the crisis in Greece and a lot of other things. And she tries to trace them all back to this meeting where basically it was the beginning of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. She tries to show us that they were sort of flawed from the very beginning, because they were compromises between different kinds of ideas of what kind of economical world order would be the best for, you know, the world. So this was an interesting book. It's something I knew very little about going into it, so I definitely learned lots from this book. I did feel like the structure was a bit of a mess. I felt like I was tossed around a bit too much. I mean, I was never really in doubt about when or where I was when I was reading the book, but it just felt like she could have stuck with one thing a bit longer before throwing me into something new all the time. And I also felt like the book had a weird amount of pages dedicated to Virginia Woolf, because she did not really have anything to do with the economical side of things. She was there because Maynard Keynes, which is an economist and who was a very important part of this book, was one of the people in her circle of people. So her diaries were used as a source to describe him as a person. But that was fine, but why you would go into her novels and her life as much as she did, I didn't really understand what benefit the book had of that. But I mean, I'm always up for reading about Virginia Woolf, so it was fine. So this was a solid book. It was a very basic introduction. If anything, I would have wanted a bit more about the economical stuff and a bit less about the personal aspects of these people that were involved. But I mean, overall, this was a good start. It's the kind of book that gives you an overview, and then if you want to go into it further, you will have that baseline to attach new information to, which is kind of how I like to learn new things. So it was a good book. And the last book I have read that I wanted to talk about was Hunger, a memoir of my body by Roxane Gay. So earlier this year I read Bad Feminist by her, which I enjoyed. I really liked her voice and her writing style in that. But I wasn't necessarily interested in all of the essays that was in that collection, just because she's writing about different aspects of pop culture, and some of the things she was writing about I had no kind of relation to, and that just made them less interesting to read about for me. But I had a feeling that Hunger would be a different kind of story, that I would really enjoy this more. And I was right. This is a very powerful story about her life. Naturally, it is a memoir, but it is very much linked to her experience having her body and how that affects how she is seen and how she is living her life. Her body is big. She's both tall and very overweight. She's black, and she has an experience where something was done to her body that she was not capable of stopping. She was brutally raped at the age of 12. And we hear a lot about how her body has always shaped the kind of life she's having, the kind of experience she's having, the kind of comments she's getting, and the opportunities or lack of opportunities she's having. And it was just a very powerful story. Again, this is a book I find hard to talk about because it's hard to sort of rate a person's life like this, but I did find it an emotional read. I was kind of surprised at how much I did relate to some of the things in this book, because my experience in my body is very different from hers, but still there were things that I felt very much related to me as well. And it made me think about the experience of having a body and how the body you are in sort of affects how the world sees you. And it made me think about things in a new way. So that was interesting. So I'm very happy to have read that book. It's probably my favorite of the 4 that I have mentioned today. And then November started, and I finally allowed myself to dig into my pile of possibilities for nonfiction November. And I finished 2 of the books on that pile, Limbo by Dan Fox and The Odd Woman and the City by Vivian Gornick. I'm not going to get into those today because I'm going to save that for a nonfiction November wrap-up. I've also finished a nonfiction audiobook by Charles Duhugg called, oh my god, what is it called? Smarter, Faster, Better, something like that, which I mostly read for work. It's all about productivity. I've started a new audiobook with kind of along the same lines called Atomic Habits. And then I've also started 3 other books. 2 were on my pile of possibilities. This one wasn't. This is Changing My Mind, Occasional Essays by Zadie Smith. About halfway through that one. Started The Language Myth by Vivian Evans, which was my choice for truth. And I've also started Soccernomics by Simon Kuper&Stefan Szymanski, which is my choice for sport. I'm really enjoying all of those at the moment, so hopefully I'll be able to finish all 3, well, all 4, including the audiobook, by the end of November. We'll see about that. And then, as I said, I'll do a bit of a book haul at the end. Some of these books you will have already seen if you've watched my channel, because, well, the weekend 3 weeks ago I was in Oslo and I had a very bookish weekend, bought a lot of books, and I sort of panned over them lying on the bed, but I thought I should just show them to you and give you my reason for buying them very quickly at the end of this. So the first shop I went into that day was, well, actually the first I did that day was that I was at a flea market, and I bought 3 books at that flea market. The first of which was the trilogy about Alberta by Kåss. This is books that I already own, but the editions that I own are abridged versions, and I think this is the edition that is unabridged. And when I saw it at the flea market, I grabbed it because this is the edition that I actually want to read of this trilogy, and hopefully I will be getting to that trilogy fairly soon. I also picked up a book by Linn Ullmann, which is an author I have really enjoyed in the past. This is called A Blessed Child. I don't really know much about the book, but I know that I like the author, so I got that. And then I got a very beautiful old book towards the end with this leather spine. And this was actually published in 1922, it says here. This is a biography of Queen Victoria. I have no idea about whether it's good or not, but I know that it was a beautiful book, and I like reading biographies, and I thought it would be interesting to read a biography about Victoria from a time closer to her actual lifetime. And I kind of accidentally read the last line of the biography, and it ends on this: about her greatness as regent, the history will have to judge. So I like that. So that was my first 3 purchases. Then I went on to Oslo, and as you saw in my video, if you've seen that vlog, I went into Outland, which is one of those, you know, great geek bookshops with lots of sci-fi, fantasy, manga and other comics. And I was super happy to find Infidel and Rapture by Cameron Hurley, because these are books 2 and 3 in the Beldam Apocrypha. Yeah, how do you pronounce that word? I don't know. But I've read the first book in this series, and I've been looking for books 2 and 3 for a long time. Haven't found them anywhere, and I kind of have this thing going where I try to not buy books online. I want to buy them in physical bookshops. Been looking for these for like a year and a half. So when I finally found them, I was super happy and I grabbed them instantly. And then I also got Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. I have started this. Did start it in October, which was not the greatest idea because I was planning to read only nonfiction in November, but this is fun. I'm about 100 pages in, and this is sort of grimdark fantasy, but it's got a lot of humor to it, and so far it's been a romp, so I'm enjoying this. Then I went on to my favorite bookshop in Oslo, which is called Tronsmo, which is an independent bookshop with great curation. And I got 3 books there. I got Year of the Monkey by Patti Smith, which I've been super excited to read because I've loved the other books I've read by her. Also got Whose Story Is This by Rebecca Solnit, with the subtitled Old Conflicts, New Chapters. And it says, who gets to shape the narrative of our times? The current moment is a battle royale over that foundational power, one in which women, people of color, non-straight people are telling other versions, and white people and men, and particularly white men, are trying to hang onto the old versions and their own centrality. In Whose Story Is This, Rebecca Solnit appraises what's emerging, why it matters, and what the obstacles are. So that sounded interesting, and I really enjoyed what I've read of Rebecca Solnit before, so, you know, had to have it. And then finally I bought this one called The Football War by Ryszard Kapuscinski, which is a Polish journalist and writer. I've read one book by him before, which was really good. And I have to admit, I grabbed this, well, partly because it was on sale, as proven by the red sticker, partly because it was called The Football War, because I thought this might be a shorter version of something I could use for the prompt of sports for Nonfiction November. This isn't actually about football, it's about his life as a war correspondent in several different wars, including a war that was called the Football War because it erupted over a football match. So we'll see if I get to this in November as well, but I was intrigued when I found it. And then finally I was meeting up with some friends, and one of them was the friend I mentioned earlier that had been cleaning out her bookshelves and had asked if anybody wanted a book in a pile she posted a picture of, so I grabbed Black Vodka of her, which I have already read and talked about today. And I also got Valeria Luiselli's Lost Children Archive, which I have heard great things about from people I trust, so I'm very eager to read this as well. So that was a not so quick recap of what I've been doing for the past 3 weeks, and hopefully it will not be 3 weeks until I'm here in front of the camera again. Hope you're having a wonderful reading month, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.